Hyperinflation is something that's driven by a central institution, for example, by increasing the monetary supply. But hyper-Bitcoinization is something that happens voluntarily because people choose to use a better form of money. And over time, that form of money, which is Bitcoin, replaces all other existing forms of money.
Hey everyone, quick thing before we start. Over 50,000 of you keep coming back to watch and listen to this podcast, but over 65% of you still haven't subscribed yet. So here's my simple ask. If you find value in my Bitcoin content and you enjoy what I'm doing, please take a second to hit subscribe on YouTube or follow me on your go-to podcasting app. It's a small action that really helps push my content through the algorithm, and this way we can make sure that more people learn about Bitcoin. Thanks for being part of this journey. Now let's dive into this episode. All right, Leon Wankum, my friend. Welcome back to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Thank you, Bram. Thanks for having me again. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. I think last time that we really saw each other in real life, that was at Amsterdam Bitcoin conference, I think. But before that, for the people listening, episode number 8. So in the first 10 episodes, Leon was already on and we discussed how Bitcoin is digital real estate. Leon is a real estate developer. And I was thinking, man, like now that you're here again, I'd like to go a bit deeper on, the implications of Bitcoinization, the potential for Bitcoin to like redefine store of value and perhaps take away a piece of what real estate is filling now, and how it might disrupt like traditional financial systems. So, by the way, next to being a real estate developer, you also have an economics background. You actually wrote your final thesis on Bitcoin. So I think you're the perfect guy to talk to when it comes to like the blending of real estate and Bitcoin. So I'm excited to chat again, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And like you said, so in 2015, I wrote my master's thesis about Bitcoin. And back then I had a very specific lens on Bitcoin because I was evaluating it as a new form of money. And I had a very, an academic perspective. And I was coming also from a Keynesian background. And I drove into Austrian economics with the thesis, but I looked at Bitcoin as money, really.
Yeah.
And then I went into the world of real estate, and both Bitcoin and real estate over the past 10 years have been part of my life. And last time we really talked about real estate's, the monetary premium that sits in real estate. But I think like by now, most Bitcoiners and also a lot of no-coiners actually, they have understood that Bitcoin is a superior store of value. But then the question is, what happens next, right?
Yeah.
What happens after?
Yeah. Let's dive into that. Let's start with Bitcoinization. What is it, and how will it unfold? I think you have a good idea around that.
Yeah. So I think to take it to an extreme, we can talk about hyper-Bitcoinization. Just theoretically speaking, what is hyper-Bitcoinization? And hyperinflation is something that's driven by a central institution, for example, by increasing the monetary supply. But hyper-Bitcoinization is something that happens voluntarily because people choose to use a better form of money. And over time, that form of money, which is Bitcoin, replaces all other existing forms of money. But I think Bitcoinization is actually a better term because it looks like it's going to be a gradual process. Mm-hmm. There are also fiat substitutes like Tether, for example, that are being used alongside of Bitcoin because I think also mentally speaking, to make the switch from fiat to Bitcoin is difficult for like the individual worldwide, right? So Bitcoinization, I think, is the process that we're living through right now. And it's the process where Bitcoin is being adopted as a form of money, but also the process where Bitcoin absorbs the monetary premium that sits in other asset classes, right? So the process of Bitcoinization is the monetization process of Bitcoin, the asset, and the secondary effects that come with it. Also referencing back to your episode with Jeff, because he explains it very well, it's very difficult for people to imagine what deflation actually means. Mm-hmm. Because our point of reference is an inflationary system, and that has been the case for our parents and also for our grandparents. So it's almost in our DNA to believe that an inflationary system is normal. So it's very hard for people to believe what deflation actually means. And the natural progress of technology in the free market is to bring the prices of goods and services down to their marginal cost of production. But because money is being increased all the time, that doesn't happen and things become more expensive. And I think housing is a very good example for that. And you showed the increase in nominal value in real estate and housing in the Netherlands. And you also showed that at the moment, because Bitcoin is monetizing, it's actually falling in value in Bitcoin very rapidly, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a very good example, actually, of this process: inflation versus deflation, and the mispricing of goods and services, and what's the secondary effect for the individual. Because a home, especially for a society, it's the very basis of living, and to have money that erodes the very basis of society, and that creates fake price signals and a mismanagement of resources, and misallocation of resources as well. And Bitcoinization, I think, will help to allocate resources better and be more efficient, because the economic system we're living in today, it's all built on growth.
Yes.
Right? It's all built on constant growth.
Yeah. That's exactly what I wanted to say. And I think that's a big learning point for me, is to keep the fiat money Ponzi basically alive. And why is it a Ponzi, right? You borrow from the future, you create money in the now, and therefore you devalue all the current existing money units, right? That people hold. And you can only kind of like fix that or obfuscate that, I would say, by making prices higher, right? Like, so for homes, like, oh, my home goes up, that's great, in nominal terms, maybe 20, 30% or whatever, and that kind of like disguises the actual debasement of each money unit. So people are kind of tricked into thinking, oh, it's going very well. But I think, as you're saying, it has to grow, because once there is a point in time where there's no growth or deflation, then already all hell breaks loose. The value of the things that we invest in, for example, the home is a prime asset for many people. At least that's what we've learned, right? That has to continue to go up. But the secondary effects that we see is that no one can buy a house. No younger person can buy a home anymore. So you see already like this narrative, or at least functionally, you already see it breaking, right? And that will only become more and more clear as people who are older and want to sell their homes, they probably cannot find younger people that can actually pay the price, right, or the amount of fiat money units that they want to get for that, or else they would be, the sellers would be underwater basically, and that is something that no one wants. So it's already interesting to see that is already kind of squeaking that system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's already happening.
So you say like this Bitcoinization goes slow, it's not hyper, it's not suddenly. What are like milestones that we can look at?
I think that when Bitcoin, the market cap of Bitcoin, surpassed silver, I think that was a milestone. I think the next milestone is when we reach the market cap of gold. I expect that to happen in 2029. So not in this bull market, but possibly in the next one. If not in 2029, 4 years after, in 2033. And then I think what I also think will be interesting, which will happen around the same time, is the parity of Bitcoin with the average US home. Because I think that will really help people to understand Bitcoin is not just better store value than precious metals, because culturally they're not used that much. Sure, precious metals are used also in portfolio management and modern portfolio management to hedge against boom and bust cycles, economic uncertainties. But culturally, especially in the Western world, we don't really hold precious metals to store value. We actually do it in our homes. So the moment when Bitcoin will reach parity with the average US home, I think that will be another milestone. And the recent events in the US, whatever you think about it, and I'll maybe also give it at least some of my thoughts on it shortly, but to have the largest economy in the world actively pushing policies that are not anti-Bitcoin, I think just from a game theory perspective, it's pretty interesting. It is true that at the same time, it looks like they're pushing anything they can and actually dumping on the population, but it looks like we are in the end status of the fiat system, right? Because if you really look at what fiat means, if money loses value, like also other things lose value. And we live in an immoral system anyway, because fiat by design is unmoral, it's unethical. So I think at one point, or on the one hand, have the largest economy in the world actively pushing pro-Bitcoin policies is great. And from a game theoretical perspective, it forces other politicians to do the same. And jurisdictions that are capitalistic and free, they, I think, will embrace pro-Bitcoin policies.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and while self-custody is important, it has its own risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your custody setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-signature vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Your funds are fully auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Check out onrampbitcoin.com through the link below and schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team to get to know them and learn more about their offering.
But to also see that at the same time, all other sorts of tokens are being pushed, that's very question worthy. But I guess that ties into the nature of the fiat system, because if you do think about it, crypto is actually fiat. So I'm not talking about cryptography, of course. I'm talking about cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin. I think you can define it as fiat on steroids in a way, because it's actually much easier to create money. It's not a debt-based system. It's a hype-based system. So there's a different dynamic, obviously, in the supply and demand of it. But if you do think about it, it resembles the fiat system. So I do believe that as the Bitcoinization happens, what we will see along the next, I'd say, 8 to 12 years is also some sort of, I would call it degenerate behavior without judging it. But what I mean by it, as inflation increases, right, also the moral of society decreases. And I always bring up the example of Germany, the Weimar Republic. That was the government of Germany from 1918 till 1933. The Germans lost the war against France, and in 1871, which was the prior war between Germany and France under Bismarck, the Germans actually took a lot of the gold from the French, and they created the Reichsbank with the reserves of the French. And to take revenge after the French won the First World War, they forced Germany to pay crazy reparations. I think it was something around 5 billion francs. But at that time, that was obviously worth much more. And Germany produced a lot of currency to pay back the reparation. And as a result of that, the economy collapsed and Germany fell into socialism, right? And the rest is history. So what we see something similar. The collapse of society is happening much, much slower right now. And I also think it won't be as bad because Bitcoin, while society is deteriorating and inflation rates are increasing, Bitcoin is monetizing and rising in price. And I do believe that can create a cushion that catches the free market, because at the end of the day, after every war, after every crisis, the free market is able to recover, right? Despite the centralized policies that destroy the mechanism of the free market. After the system collapses, the free market usually is able to recover. And with Bitcoin, the free market cannot just recover, it can actually protect itself against these tendencies of extortion and inflation.
Yeah. I think this is exactly why we call Bitcoin a life raft, right? Like it is a way to not become a victim in the financial system, that we operate in now. Like you can just step out of the system and be protected against, whatever's going on there. But I agree, crypto, investing in crypto or trying to trade that or whatever, it's kind of like financial nihilism. It's like, yeah, there's no other way that I can like purposefully spend or save my fiat money. So I'm going to try to get rich in this crazy Wild West casino. It's kind of like that, which I don't think we can blame people, because it's probably kind of like a natural result of the future nihilism that fiat money invokes. Once you realize that you cannot save anymore, and each time you go to the supermarket, maybe month over month, like in the West, I think it's a bit slower also with inflation and stuff, so people see the difference. But it's not like Lebanon or something where from one day to the other there's like 100% inflation. Like that would wake you up instantly, probably. But yeah, because we both live in the eurozone. It just goes a bit slower because the euro is, compared to the rest of the fiat monies, still a strong, quote unquote, air quotes, currency. So it goes a bit slower. But I think another big realization of myself is that like all the money systems are the same. Like all the fiat money systems are the same. You and I are just lucky that we live in one that is stronger than others, but there's no different outcome, basically. But I also agree, the fact that Bitcoin exists gives you an opportunity to shield yourself from this natural decay almost that fiat money goes through.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, as money loses value, people also fall in extreme political tendencies, right? And they actually make the problem worse. Also, I think now the US dollar will be weakened, because what will happen now is that I think the current US government, what they have understood is that Bitcoin is rising faster than fiat inflation rates. Yes. But they're not really building a Bitcoin reserve. They're just using Bitcoin as a hedge to be able to inflate the dollar further. I think it's just like important to understand also, they're not doing it to strengthen the dollar. They're actually buying Bitcoin to be able to weaken the dollar further. So like now with Bitcoin, because we're talking about Bitcoinization, Bitcoin is actually helping now the fiat system to be alive longer, right? Mm-hmm. Because Bitcoin is going to increase in purchasing power faster than the interest rate on the fiat denominated debt of the US government. And also by the nature of Tether, I think we'll see a dollarization of the world. So Bitcoin is helping the fiat system to stay alive for a bit longer, but possibly that is a good thing, because at the same time, Bitcoin is monetizing, and the point where the fiat system will eventually collapse. And a collapse is also slow. A collapse could be also that debt will just be erased, right? Savings will just be erased. That is possible. But at that time, Bitcoin will be worth multiple millions, and the private sector and the free market at that point will be so strong that it cannot be taken down by a possible collapse or decay of the fiat system. So I didn't expect this to actually happen when I got into Bitcoin, but we're living in a very interesting timeline.
Yeah, I think that's a nice bridge to, why would people go to this Bitcoin system, right? And you mentioned something like the natural hurdle rate. Like once you understand that Bitcoin is verifiably the most scarce asset in the world, it's digital money, it's property, you can really own it. And once I send it to you, you really own it. And it's not, physically, literally, it's not in my possession anymore, right? So it's a superior store of value asset, and eventually it's also superior money. And once you see, or, after study, and it takes some time, even when you have a master's degree in economics, once you understand that storing your wealth, the economic value that you gathered in anything else than Bitcoin is an inferior choice, an inferior way to do that, then Bitcoin becomes this natural hurdle rate, as in, if I hold Bitcoin, what will I spend it for? Or, or exchange it for to maybe store wealth in a different asset. So this natural hurdle rate will eventually, I think, also like reshape the understanding of value creation and productivity, etc. Right? So I've talked about this before, but like if I hold Bitcoin and you come to me with some sort of proposal to, I don't know, build something for me or deliver a certain service or whatever, I really have to be convinced that you deliver me value that's on par with what I expect before I part ways with my Bitcoin, basically. And I think once people see that. I do think we will have a time where there's like two prices or something, right? Like people are going to price in euros and are going to price in Bitcoin, maybe at the same time. I heard an example of Eastern Caribbean dollar or something. Maybe I'm butchering that, but something in the Caribbean where they have like prices in the supermarkets in dollars and Eastern Caribbean dollar. And when you pay in dollars, you get a Eastern Caribbean dollar back, basically.
Of course.
So the people that have a store, they already exchange the weak money for the strong money, and they give the weak money away as the change when people pay. And I think we'll see that with Bitcoin as well. But then at one point, we're going to have like, you know, if you have some sort of tender, right? Like who's going to build these homes, for example? And there's 3 offers, 2 are in fiat money and 1 is in Bitcoin. You will eventually understand that the person that wants Bitcoin for their work understands the level of the value exchange that you are about to enter into, right? And like your expectation of him delivering real value or enough value, whatever your expectation is. So it's comparable to getting Bitcoin as a reward. And I find that a really interesting thought, because that will increase competition between any service provider or any person that builds products and or builds homes, you know, in your sector. So yeah, how do you see that? Like how something like I'm envisioning here, or a bit different?
Yeah, you said a lot of good things that I want to comment on, so hope not to forget it. I'll answer your question first. So I think it's a good thing. Competition is a great thing, and also having high standards, Bitcoin as a hurdle rate, that's a good thing. Competition is great for the market. And it's not good to orientate as a society towards the lowest common denominator. But I think it's good to have certain standards. And also, as an analogy, Bitcoin is a monetary standard, right? That's what Bitcoin is. And there's no such thing as risk-free. Today, people will consider something to be risk-free if it's something that the government pledges to pay, because the belief amongst a modern monetary theory is that the government will be able to continuously produce money. But that's actually a fallacy, because obviously the risk of fiat currencies collapsing is so high that, and it's not really taken into account. But something like a risk-free rate, the rate with the lowest risk would be Bitcoin and cold storage. And I think the hurdle rate or the interest rate would be the yearly increase in purchasing power of Bitcoin plus a risk premium, right? So the hurdle rate would be the yearly increase in purchasing power of Bitcoin. And if you would lend out your Bitcoin, what you would ask for in return would most likely be the yearly increase in purchasing power, plus you'd ask for a risk premium, because if you lose out on the Bitcoin, you actually lose out on the increase in purchasing power forever, because Bitcoin is designed to increase in purchasing power forever. So there's huge risk with giving it out. So that risk premium would be quite high. So let's assume interest rates would be around 15%, right? People would really think about what they do. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
With cheap money, there's very little risk. And if there's little risk, there's little responsibility.
Yes.
And without self-responsibility, society will fall into this dark hole. And inflation really represents that irresponsible behavior. And I'm not trying to judge it, because I work in real estate. I'm a Bitcoiner. So I'm right in between the fiat system and the Bitcoin system. And I do profit of both. I came as a young Bitcoiner into the world of real estate, and that helped me to understand the fiat system, that helped me to understand Bitcoin. So I'm going through my own journey, and we all are going through our own journeys. And a lot of people that haven't heard about Bitcoin yet, they will hear about Bitcoin, and there will be more and more people voluntarily using Bitcoin to store value or to make payments, or what you said, use it as collateral, because people usually hoard good money because they understand it increases in purchasing power. That's why the example that you gave, people want to hold dollars. People
as compared, right? So when someone hears like, sorry to interrupt, but just to make it clear, like, when you say Bitcoin is designed to increase in purchasing power, right? That sounds too good to be true. But I think what we need to add to that is, because any alternative that you can use as money or a store of value is verifiably inferior, right? And as more and more people understand that, they will come to the conclusion that Bitcoin is the best way to store value. So they will leave these other monies and eventually pick the best money. So over time, Bitcoin compared to any other money that you can price any product or service in will buy you more of that product or service than any of the other monies. Do I explain that correctly like that?
Yes, correct.
Okay, cool.
That is correct. Plus, technology by nature is deflationary.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin as disinflationary money, meaning a money that has less supply over time, is just able to reflect that reality because it increases in purchasing power. Plus, at the moment, we have many fiat currencies, and fiat currencies are being printed at the push of a button, right? And historically, every fiat currency went to zero, and Bitcoin is absolutely scarce. So there's that dynamic, both with the relationship between Bitcoin and fiat, which will exist for, let's say, the next 50 years at least, in my opinion. Very hard to say, of course, it's just like a guess. And you also have the natural tendency of the market and of technology. And at some point in the future, Bitcoin will most likely be an index for global productivity. And at this point, I would consider it to be some sort of index for like global ingenuity, because from really what I see online, some of the smartest people in the world globally, they tap into the Bitcoin network. Companies that are using it to store value, individuals that are using it to transact, and also systems like the Lightning Network, where Bitcoin is being used to provide liquidity. That's also some sort of utility that Bitcoin has within the technological sphere of money transmitting, right?
Yeah.
And I think as the use of Bitcoin with that increases, price does as well.
And some people call Bitcoin pristine collateral. That's basically because there is no like third-party risk attached to the Bitcoin protocol itself. How would you explain the pristine collateral? I think you're better at that.
Yeah, I mean, I can try, because I mean, right now it's true that I am involved in lending a lot, because the real estate market by its nature is that intense. The way I would consider collateral would not be something that yields cash flow, because most people would probably expect me now to say that collateral should be something that yields cash flow. I would consider something to be good collateral if it increases in value in proportion to other outstanding monies over time and other outstanding goods and services. Because what that means is, if you lend against it, obviously over time, and it increases in value within the inflationary system. This is something that I have to make clear. I'm talking now within the structure of an inflationary system existing, and Bitcoin existing as a disinflationary asset, is an absolutely scarce asset. Because I just have to mention that imagine a Bitcoin standard where Bitcoin would be the main type of money. If you would take out a loan in Bitcoin, it would actually increase in value over time. So the debt that you would take on would actually increase in value over time. But in the fiat system, where more currency is being introduced to the market, if you take on debt over time, that debt decreases in real terms. And Bitcoin now exists alongside the inflationary fiat system. So if you hold Bitcoin and you do take out a loan against Bitcoin, over time, the LTV, the loan to value ratio of your loan, decreases, meaning the risk decreases as well. Of course, there's high volatility in Bitcoin. That's why you need to over-collateralize loans. But I also think actually for a market that's good, because it creates resilience and also forces people to actively think about their decisions.
If you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, where are you keeping your Bitcoin seed words? For me, there's only one way, and that's backing up my seed phrase with stamp seed. It's a single durable plate without any parts or materials. Stamp your words into solid titanium, which is fire-resistant, water-resistant, and built to last. Unlike etching or engraving, stamp seed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, making it easy for you to protect your generational wealth. Don't risk losing your seed phrase on paper. Get a stamp seed plate for unmatched protection. You can use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% off at stampseed.com.
Yeah, it's interesting that Bitcoin kind of introduces. I don't know if the word social contract is a or like if that term is a good term, but it forces you. I think you said it well. Like, it forces you to become responsible. Whereas, as you mentioned before, because the fiat money is in a downward spiral anyway, it doesn't matter if you spend it on a shitty thing that has no value, right? Especially also because at the same time you're kind of forced to spend it, right? All the Keynesians say it's about the speed of money and you need to spend it, etc. Well, that's to keep the Ponzi going. But if you're not conscious about what you're spending your money on as the consumer or the buyer, but also on the other side as the creator, that what you're receiving as a reward is losing its value all the time. Like the incentive structure is negative, and that kind of like fuels into each other, right? Like just look at the quality of certain, I don't know, when I look at toys here, for example, like old like Duplo blocks, like these building blocks. I have old ones for myself, and I've bought new ones also. Like the new ones are lighter, thinner, less quality. It's very interesting. And I have like Duplo blocks from like 30 years old, which are stronger than this toy, for example. And I think that's just interesting to see that over time, the quality of anything that's denominated or rewarded in, a fiat money, you just see it going down because the incentives become more and more negative. Whereas with Bitcoin, that totally flips and they become positive. I'm going to be conscious about what I'm spending my Bitcoin on. I'm going to be conscious about what I produce when I get Bitcoin as a reward. And I just love that that contrast, right? Like it's kind of like a mirror, like a positive mirror to the negative fiat money system.
Yeah, I like it as well. It actually gets me exciting. If you think about it, that despite inflation, which is, like you said, between 7 to 20%, depending on the year and depending on the jurisdiction, but despite that rate of inflation, because of technological progress, actually our life is getting better over time. So if we look at the last century, people are getting older, they're getting healthier. Sure, there's a mental health crisis right now that also ties in, I think, to inflation, because inflation makes life tough and it creates stress. And it's a very stressful environment, the fiat system, if you think about it. Also, to be successful in the fiat system actually means to be able to deal with stress in a way, because you need to go through stress, and people respect people that go through stress. But I don't think that's a healthy attitude towards wealth or towards well-being or towards a good quality of life, right? But despite that, things are getting better. And so now imagine we would have a money that's limited in supply that could really reflect the reality of the market.
Yes. I love that you mentioned this, because this is very true, right? Like objectively, if you just, if you probably look at the entire world, people get older, less babies die, like all these things. Yes, there is progress. And so you see that is a path that we're on. But I love the explainer in the book of Lynn Alden, Broken Money, where she says, and just as Jeff Booth says, right, like our innate tendency to be more productive, be more effective, etc. Like that's why we innovate, and that is deflationary. But we price everything in an inflationary money, and these things battle with each other. And although we slowly progress, the bread is also €5 and not 50 cents anymore, as like 50 years ago, right? And so when you see like that example, I always think like, well, which side is winning? Because you would expect that we would be better at making bread in 50 years, right? Or everyone would have like a bread machine here where they just, put in some water and ingredients, and then boom, like the bread pops out and it's free or something, But we're not there yet. And so I love this thought, because we should think about, okay, if we have a scarce money, like that is what will give us abundance eventually, because everyone that deals, that exchanges value with this absolute scarce money will be 100% incentivized to deliver value, to innovate, to really do their best. Like you cannot half-ass it anymore, because people won't accept that level of value anymore. And I love thinking about how that conceptually would work, because then we would force each other to actually do everything we could do to the best of our ability to create valuable things, whatever they are, right? It could be art or a fountain or architecture, but it could also be the technology, the food, like just basically anything humans can produce. But I think this is a big step that we're taking. But I mean, I see that it excites you. I think this is the same what excites me, like just the imagination of that future imagine how fast we could go if we just have the same rate of what we're doing, but valuing it in a better money. We would already accelerate tremendously.
By like 100x, 1,000x,
Probably,
or a million x, like multiples. I think it's like the abundance. Sometimes I think like it is possible, and if you really listen to yourself, and if sometimes what I do, the world is very busy, and we spend a lot of time discussing these things online. But if you really go out, I think in nature, sometimes you really think about these things, it becomes very clear. Because your point of reference really changes. Sometimes our point of reference is tied to our environment, and we are surrounded by the media and institutions and society that has been embedded in an inflationary system for so long. But when you step out of it, because you said there's two systems now, it's your personal choice. What system do you want to be part of? You want to be part of a system that gives a solid foundation, it's sound money for a sound society, it helps you, it accelerates your personal development because you have more time, or do you want to be part of a system where it's proven that the system will fail, but it's also proven that the system will steal from you?
I mean, this is why it's so hard to grok Bitcoin, I'd say, because really accepting the latter that you just said, I think I'm talking about this now in this way, like it's kind of a red pill. That's not a nice realization. And it was one of my big moments where I realized, hey, I'm participating in a system where I'm not a player but a subject. Holy moly, like that's not a nice thing to realize. And I 100% agree with you. I think Bitcoin as a money system is a system of optimism about the future. That's what it really brings you. It gives you time and space to explore who you are and why you're here. Whereas like the fiat money system is a zero-sum game system, right? I win, you lose. People are very nihilistic about the future. I mean, that's the whole point why I started this podcast, is I see our generation struggling to take the big steps in this phase of their lives that, we were told about when we were younger, and starting families and buying homes and all these things. And people are unsure if they want to have children, like all of our biological urge is basically worked against because humans made a flawed money system, and just thinking about that, just that difference couldn't be any bigger in my mind. And I think this is a good moment to emphasize like that, why people say Bitcoin is hope. It's that, like, it's Bitcoin is hope for the future, like make yourself optimistic about the future. Like I would love to live towards the future and see what's going to happen there. If it's really deflationary and we really get the flying cars, right, that we were promised, wow, what a crazy society that would be. How fun, how cool to see that unfold, right? Whereas like the fiat money system future is kind of like, well, I don't want to have kids because I think they don't have a future. That's so depressing, dude.
It's very depressing. It's very anti-human. And there is another option, though. And Bitcoinization, it's not just a process that will affect like money, finance, and economics. It also influences human action. Because if you think about it, money is the very essence of human interaction. Mm-hmm. In a modern civilization, if you go back even to the Sumerians, the form of money that they had was a ledger-based system, similar actually to the Bitcoin time chain, the Bitcoin blockchain, where people recorded who owns what. That's essentially also what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a ledger that records who owns what. That's what money is, right? Yeah. And if you look at the Sumerians, for example, the way that the monetary system worked was that people had a lot of time, and because people had a lot of time, they were able to progress culturally, technologically, and spiritually on a level where today we look back at that culture and we don't even understand how they were able to come up with these technologies, right? Yeah. And I do believe it has to do with not constantly being stressed and having time, yes. Right?
I agree. I think those two are correlated, right? Like if you don't have time and space to think about, well, I always call it like this, like what is going on here, right? Like just understand our place in the universe and why am I here? And, what am I really? The whole ego battle and all these things. Just to go on that journey, you need time. And if you don't have time because you need more and more money to basically stay alive, that is what eats away at, I'd say, the spiritual part of your life in general, right? Then you're like totally captured in the physical world, and you're also distracted by the physical world, and all the bread and circus type stuff just keeps you away from going on that inner journey that is something I've come to understand is a part of the life, right? Like the integration of the duality, or well, some people say the non-duality, as you know, that what we are is both, you know, outside and inside of our body. But that I found is one of the most rewarding things that I've been doing in my life, and I'm happy that I've been able, and I know that I'm super privileged that I've been able to create that time and space. I think it's more that we both wish that that is something that anyone could experience.
Yeah, I'm very thankful actually for Bitcoin, because whenever I was down in my life, Bitcoin actually came into my life when I was kind of an existential crisis as a young adolescent, or as a 21-year-old, and it kind of actually saved my life in that perspective. That might sound very, very, very extreme, but it did, and it did help me to find a new meaning in life. Mm-hmm. And also become like who I'm, I think, supposed to be, kind of like fulfill my destiny. Because if you do think about it, we're all on this earth for a certain reason. And I think sometimes we can get distracted and we don't find that reason. And that also can lead to trauma and all the negative things in the world. So when we say fix the money, fix the world, it sounds a bit extreme. But it is true that money is linked with so much. And when people say money is the root cause of all evil, that's actually not true, because what the Bible said was the greed for money is the root cause of all evil. And if we have a greedy monetary system, sure, it creates greed and negative consequences, but there's also a different possibility, and that is Bitcoin. So Bitcoinization, I think, goes really, really deep into the very essence of what it means to be a human and the human experience. And I also think it's not a coincidence that AI and Bitcoin are developing so fast at the same time, because I think these technologies can really help to free up time and to bring humanity on a new level of consciousness.
Yes. I could not agree more. You know what I also find interesting, that also through this podcast, I realized that a lot of people that found Bitcoin have these thoughts. And I think that's a signal by itself. And what I also have experienced myself is when I think about if I wouldn't have Bitcoin, how would I feel right now? Super anxious. Yeah. Total future nihilist. Right? Like, honestly, like I don't now that I understand how the money works, how messed up it is, that I'm a subject in a system that I don't understand. Yeah, what should I do? You know, like that thought gives me like a helpless feeling. And Bitcoin for me is an anchor, or that life raft that we talked about. And yes, it takes time to study and to integrate that, and like to challenge all the preconceptions you have, or all the beliefs or understanding. You realizing that you did a master's in economics and realizing that you were never taught about money. You know, like it's stuff like that once you are able, and that is a little personal challenge, right? Once you are able to accept that, then you, at least that's how it worked for me, it's easier to take the step and to think like, okay, I'm going to figure this shit out now, because, you know, nobody's coming to save me, and I don't want to be a subject, right? Like it's kind of like in the Matrix, the guy that knows the steak is fake, but he still wants to eat the steak. You know that part, like the guy that betrays Neo and the group.
Yeah,
you can do that, but spiritually, that's a very, very, very bad choice, because you know that what you're participating in is fake, and so you are part of the abusement in that fake and broken system, and you willingly choose to do so because you're too scared to go on, you know, the spiritual challenge that is laid out in front of you once you understand the system that you're in.
Yeah, no, for sure. I do believe though that, for example, I know it will take me another decade to maneuver out of the Fiat system due to my entanglement within real estate development. Some of the projects, they will only be finished in 10 years. And the way that the system works, it's kind of rigged against you. So if you work in real estate, you don't take on debt, you go bankrupt, because with higher interest rates now, costs have also risen. due to inflation, construction costs have risen substantially. So you need to constantly refinance the projects. So you are participating in the system in a way, but I think the way from both, it's actually interesting because we could talk about this now from a spiritual, moral perspective, but also from the perspective of making a good investment. Bitcoin is the better choice, which actually I think it's interesting because that doesn't really exist. Usually people say somebody that's wealthy took from somebody else.
Yes.
And it's kind of true within the realm of the fiat system because of the Cantillon effect, where if you're close to the money printer, you receive new money first, you are able to build wealth faster. But in Bitcoin, it's different. Bitcoin it's almost like a charitable system where if you are doing something that's good for yourself, everybody else benefits as well.
Yeah.
Because it's a system with a limited monetary supply where your productivity is also available for everybody else. And if you decrease the supply of Bitcoin, everybody else has an increased purchasing power.
Yeah. Well said. And I think what you're saying, like maybe it takes a decade and I slowly get out of it, out of this. I think this is exactly what we're talking about. Like, it's not that you should like escape tomorrow. You know, some people can be radical and do that. But literally what you just said, like I have a certain point in the future where I'm working towards. I know this is a big part of my personal development, my knowledge and all these things. Like that is what gives you enthusiasm for the future. Doesn't mean it's easy or something, right? But it's more like, okay, I have a path towards my future instead of not even having a path or just not even seeing where the future goes for you, right? So just having that perspective is already something that is really valuable.
I think a common thing that I see is people do have a vision that they follow, like very individually. And Bitcoin also allows you to individually pick what you want to do because it does give you the economic empowerment to fulfill your dreams, whatever those dreams are.
Yes. 100% agree. So it frees time and space for you to figure out why you're here, what you're good at, what you want to do. And that by itself is probably one of the most fulfilling journeys that you could go on. So I agree. I love that we touched upon this, man. We took a nice detour, I think, of all the things that I wrote down. But this is core to what I want to share with this podcast. Is just, you know, I hope us sharing this personal reflection on our journey just inspires other people to do the same, right? Like you have to challenge yourself in that way to eventually also experience the freeing feeling that Bitcoin is giving us, right? Like it gives us this positive outlook towards the future, even though the future is still uncertain, as with anyone. You know, maybe we're dead tomorrow, but that's okay. You know, like that is just part of the natural anxiety towards the future, I'd say. All right, let's turn back. I'm also looking at the time. I do want to touch upon, you know, we talked about this collateral part. In the beginning, we talked about, you know, monetization of Bitcoin that is kind of threatening this monetary premium in real estate. Yeah, how are these things converging? What is the effect of the understanding that Bitcoin is a superior store of value asset versus how people look at real estate now? And what will be the effect when people start to shift, perhaps selling homes, buying Bitcoin, or starting to buy Bitcoin to use as collateral versus buying real estate to use as collateral?
Yeah, so I do think that is already happening from what I can tell. Individually, people are starting to understand that Bitcoin is a superior store of value. Initially, I thought it will really drain the monetary premium. So the capital that is invested in real estate, because it's used as a savings account,
yeah.
I thought initially that will flow into Bitcoin fast. But the conclusion I came to now is because I have understood that the fiat system will exist for longer than we might want to. The nominal value of real estate will continue to increase. So I do believe that, and that the reason for that is actually globally, real estate is the most important form of collateral. So the global financial system next to bonds is built on real estate. And you saw in 2008, during the great financial crisis, once real estate values came down, the global financial system started to shake, right? So because real estate is such an important collateral, governments will not allow it to come down in nominal value. They will push liquidity into the market because governments, pension funds, and system-relevant companies and banks, they own real estate as well, and they collateralize their real estate and then lend against that to fund their own activities. So I think it's just what I came to understand is that real estate will continue to rise in nominal fiat terms. But if we understand that it's not necessarily real estate that's gone up in value, but it's the money it's measured in that has been debased, and we understand that Bitcoin is just a scarcer type of money.
Yes.
If you measure real estate in Bitcoin terms, it's losing value rapidly. So meaning if you hold Bitcoin, real estate will become very cheap for you. If you don't hold Bitcoin, you have a big problem. So I do believe that you need to hold Bitcoin. There's no other way to deal with the uncertainties of the existing system. If you want to save for yourself, if you want to build a future, if you want to be able to provide for your family, for yourself, for your loved ones, you need to hold Bitcoin because the big print is coming, right? Money will be funneled into the system. Interest rates right now are at 4%, but they will push them back down to 3.5%, 2.5%, 1.75%. And at that point, real estate will just become unaffordable for the average Joe. And that also means you're not able to build a capital base that you can lend against. Yes. Think about it. You need that in the fiat system.
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? So the value of a home, at least on paper, is something that you can use as collateral to borrow money and then invest further. But what happens when Bitcoin replaces real estate as collateral, right? Like, let's say, there's a person that is at a certain crossroads and they have to decide, okay, do I use Bitcoin or real estate as collateral? Also, by the way, because I think in parallel, for example, in America, they're talking about changing law, the SAB, that rule that says banks cannot hold Bitcoin, etc. At one point, there will be a point in time where I think banks would prefer for you to use Bitcoin as collateral. Because or maybe the combination, right, as you are also doing. So when you maybe there will be like Bitcoin mortgages where you like put up a little Bitcoin as collateral, plus you buy a home with the mortgage. So there's like a double type of collateral, which will lower the LTV ratio, etc. But Bitcoin is a better collateral. Like if you default on your mortgage, I can instantly sell my Bitcoin to, doesn't even matter who I sell it to, right? Like I can do that right now. I don't have to bring a home to auction and all that bullshit. In that way, Bitcoin is better collateral. Like what happens at that point in time with real estate?
I think we have, so within I call it the Bitcoin system because we have two systems existing now alongside of each other, fiat and Bitcoin, and possibly Bitcoin replacing fiat at some point. But I think you have startups that are Bitcoin startups. They understand the role of Bitcoin as collateral and its advantages, and they will offer Bitcoin lending products. That's number one. But that will obviously not replace real estate. I think the moment Bitcoin is going to supplant real estate as collateral is when governments have an interest in that, right? Because governments decide where liquidity is being funneled to by giving out requirements for loans. And if you own real estate, for example, you can take out a loan considerably easily because there's an interest by governments for you to funnel that money into real estate so it keeps the system afloat. So once Bitcoin is being adopted more aggressively by governments, I think they will have an interest for Bitcoin to stay afloat, right? For Bitcoin to, obviously they can't control it. And I also believe the volatility of Bitcoin will shock some state players that are coming in now. But overall, it will create more resilience. We have talked about the ability of Bitcoin to withstand these volatile price crashes where real estate cannot. And I think we see these boom and bust cycles that are getting worse and worse over time because real estate by its nature is actually not meant to be a store of value. The reason why you can make money in real estate in the scope of the fiat system is because you can take on credit, so there's leverage. Let's say you put in $1 and the bank gives you $9, you have a leverage effect of 10, meaning for every $1 of equity you put in, you have actually $10 of asset value, right? And you also have tax reductions. And these tax reductions also exist because governments want you to put liquidity into real estate because it's that collateral within the system.
Yeah.
But game theory, I think, suggests that tax laws should be favorable towards Bitcoin, and I believe that the US might be the first country to do so. If you really understand what Bitcoin is, it's money. You shouldn't tax it at all, because if you tax money, how is money going to be used? There's no velocity in money. I don't agree with Keynes that the velocity of money needs to be constantly increased, but there needs to be a certain velocity of money for something to be usable as money, and you cannot tax the use of money, because imagine I sell apples and you sell pears. If you buy an apple from me, right, and I have that money, and then a couple of days later I want pears, I come back to you, and the Bitcoin you gave me will have increased 5% in purchasing power. In theory, I would need to be taxed on that 5%. And that doesn't allow me to use Bitcoin as money. So like in El Salvador, Bitcoin should actually be considered legal tender at some point. And then there should be no taxes are to be paid on it. And that can be then really used as a store of value. And that also will, I think, enable it to be used as collateral more easily.
Yeah. I like that, because that ties into what we previously talked about. Like, if Bitcoin is accepted as money, so legal tender, it's by law. I mean, eventually Bitcoin doesn't really need a law, like we can exchange in Bitcoin right now, but it would open up the opportunity in a country to actually get to this kind of like flywheel that we talked about before, where there will be a competition of money. And because we know that Bitcoin is a superior money, and that anyone listening can verify that for themselves, right, by studying it, this competition will increase the competition in money, will increase the competition in suppliers of services and products, as we talked about before, which eventually will lead to more innovation, deflation in prices, which makes people happier, and that would make any government, you would think, more happy, right? And that would also make your country in general more prosperous, because people will be more productive, and the things they produce will be of better quality. And that will give you a competitive advantage, in your export, or with the rest of the world. So I like that you touched upon this, because if you treat Bitcoin as money, yes, you do give away certain control as a government. That's why I think it's kind of like an interesting catch-22 for a government. Like, you give away control over the fiat currency, right? The fiat currency is by decree the currency. The people are forced to use the money that the government can create, the central bank can create. But yeah, once you allow the competition of money, you will lose control over your ability to
tax, basically.
Yeah. Well, what is the biggest benefit for a government to be able to print the money is that they can spend it on anything they want, and conceptually keep the people happy with all the promises they make, etc. Like, they can go into deficits, etc., because there is no limit to the amount of money that they could basically spend. But as we, I think, talked about now for an hour, the secondary effects are very bad. So I like this. When you think about, El Salvador, of course, it's a smaller country, was really down at the bottom. But when you hear Bukele talk, he's building something from the ground up with a totally different way of looking at value and money and the freedom to transact and all these things. And there's probably things that could be done better, but I think it's just a really interesting example of someone who is taking that opportunity, chance, maybe a risk to, do it in another way, because we know that fiat money systems eventually crumble and you become dependent, perhaps even on another country, as there are many countries where the US dollar is the main currency, which is not in America, basically. And that would be the worst thing for your citizens, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think, there are trade-offs. Nothing's perfect. Everything has a trade-off. And right now, bureaucrats are not interested in supporting Bitcoin because they understand it undermines their power. But I think we should pay as much attention to their opinion as people should have done to the church when it forced people to pay the money to not go into hell. It's basically a system of control.
Yes.
And I like to compare it with that, I think. And but people that actually love their country and they love their citizens or they love their community, they would allow Bitcoin to be used because, let's say we go through a scenario of inflation, it is actually good if you have a lot of Bitcoin in your jurisdiction because it gives some foundation for society not to collapse.
Yes.
So I think over time we see in society there's a duality between, let's say, good and evil. It sounds too simplistic, but there are different forces that are fighting with each other. But over time, it seems that more positive forces win. So I think that over time, jurisdictions that believe in freedom and capitalism, they will allow Bitcoin to be held as money. And we can see that already playing out. So the German finance minister has recently talked about Bitcoin, not because he understands it, in my opinion. He could also talked about it while he was finance minister, because what he did, and maybe you know it as well.
He opposed the deficit, no? That's why he was fired. Yeah.
Exactly. Which was actually something that I think he should have done, because he's part of the, they're liberals, but they're actually not libertarians. They're a party that came from a libertarian background, and over time they've also adjusted to the fiat system. But actually, there I think what he's done was good. And now there's in February, I think, or in March, there's people here vote in Germany again. So now he's starting to talk about Bitcoin. So you can see game theory playing out. Germany has a lot of problems, but it's still in the top 5 economies in the world. So seeing the finance minister of Germany actually talking about Bitcoin positively shows actually that game theory is playing out.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's move on to the last subject.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Bitcoin and AI, we mentioned it before. I also find it very interesting that, there's this parallel development, but there's also this convergence of Bitcoin and AI. We mentioned housing as an example of the inflationary money system where prices are pushed artificially high and they decrease the living standards. And that is hard to see, but once we price in Bitcoin, it actually unveils itself to be a bad system, because in Bitcoin the prices fall. As you said, I shared a little analysis on Twitter where the past 10 years, it went from 30,000 Bitcoin for an average home to 6. And in euros, the price went up by 100% of a home, double the value. So from 230 to 460. And so in Bitcoin, it dropped 99.98% or something. So we can see that there. And what we talked about, with deflation, that's what Jeff Booth talks about. A few episodes back, I talked with Jeff about this specific thing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I know you've read also a lot of his stuff and talked with him about this. AI will bring the biggest productivity boom and gains to ever exist. Right. And any big technological advancement has always been like this compression of energy or information, from steam engine to the printing press to internet, telephone, telegram, and all these things are basically an easier way to direct energy to get something done, to be productive. And AI will be the biggest boom. But as Jeff pointed out to me, and I like that idea, if we would measure the deflationary effects of this productivity boom that AI brings us in this increasingly inflationary fiat money, that might offset all the gains that we might get from this productivity boom of AI. And so he says the best way to measure the productivity gains are in Bitcoin, as Bitcoin is the best way to measure value. It's the most, it's the best economic constant in the universe. And that's a long-winded intro to just ask you, what are your thoughts around that? Does that make sense?
It does totally make sense. And if you look into AI, what we use right now are large, LLMs, large language models a lot, but also machine learning is part of AI. So at the point where machines will actually be able to perform human-like behavior, that is already happening in robotics, and industrial plants are increasingly using AI obviously to increase the efficiency of production. And people always think, or people consider that to be a bad thing. That's just like people considered it to be a bad thing that cars would replace horses, right? Because people, I think, from their point of reference, cannot imagine what is the good that is supposed to come out of this. And AI is often seen as a threat, but I think the only threat of AI is if AI is centralized. And that was a threat that we were facing over the past 4 years, but that was now fought against. And now AI, I think, can flourish open and free. And it's one of the technologies that I think, together with Bitcoin, can really free humanity from the shackles of the fiat system and inflation because of what you just said. So in a free market, over time, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. But because of the increase in the monetary supply, we don't see that. Like, we don't really see it because things become more expensive because our unit of account, our point of references, is being inflated. But with Bitcoin, what Bitcoin really does, it just mirrors the natural tendency of the market. And if you really think about how humanity has progressed over the last, let's say, 2,000 years, or let's say 5,000 years, because I think the last 5,000 years, in the last 6,000 years, since the Sumerians, that's when we really progressed technologically. We went from an agricultural society into society with a ledger-based monetary system. We went through 2 industrial revolutions, and now we arguably have the third one, where we expand consciousness and we collectively use the internet as a way to communicate and connect with each other. And that creates a whole different playing field where we as humanity, we can progress collectively much, much faster. But because we have these different systems all over the world, at some point we had 196 different fiat currencies. These different systems all try to capture value within their respective realm. And this really can be set free with Bitcoin as this global monetary base layer that everybody can use, everybody can store their productivity in, and everybody also can gain from productivity gains, because now productivity gains are distributed towards those who take out loans, right? So if you want to profit within the system from productivity, you constantly need to incur debt. And for example, buy real estate as a scarce asset. So productivity gains sort of are funneled into real estate, but that makes a very exclusive system because not everybody's able to own real estate, right?
Yeah.
So that means we can't progress collectively as fast.
I think that's a nice way to tie in almost everything we talked about, I think, because when I think about Bitcoin, the whole idea of it being a non-sovereign asset, right? Non-sovereign, global, decentralized, trustless asset means that wherever you create any productivity gains, whether it's by AI or the enlightenment of your citizens, and so they would all do what they are best at or whatever, those efforts will be rewarded in the right proportion, I would say, right? Because right now, someone doing, building a home in Germany versus building a home in Sri Lanka versus building a home in Singapore, if they would do the exact same thing, use the exact same materials, the exact same quality, they would be rewarded differently just because of their geographical location and the money that they are forced to accept for the work that they do. And AI brings about, I'd say, a decentralized productivity gain. Yes, maybe the tools are centralized, as in some companies are in America, some companies are in Asia or whatever. But the fact that anyone has access to it, just like the internet, it opens up the playing field to take advantage of the possibility of being more productive. So in that sense, I think it's a decentralization of productivity. And the only logical way to measure that is to do that with a decentralized way of money, because then we actually have an equal playing field, and anyone in Singapore can compete with someone in Sri Lanka, can compete with someone in Germany. And that will, again, I'd say, invite anyone to do what you do to the best of your ability. And yeah, if you just think about that and push that towards the future, I don't know if there's any negative consequences to having people do that.
I think there's few. It's the opposite. I think there's a lot of positive secondary effects, and also it's some large language models, so AI. If it has a programmed or pre-programmed bias, it might not want to use Bitcoin, okay? But essentially, an AI is drilled to be efficient. And what is the most efficient settlement network? It's Bitcoin.
Yes.
And the Lightning Network in AI, right? So I think the AI is going to use Bitcoin. You can already ask most of the AIs, the large language models that you use, rather it's Grok or ChatGPT, ask if Bitcoin is a superior money to fiat currency. Sometimes they list the risk, but mostly they say yes. And it's interesting, right? So I think that as also financial services become more automated, because one of the industries that invests the most in AI is the financial service industry, because the financial service is always interested to push down costs and to increase revenue. There are other industries as well, but the financial industry is one of the industries that invests the most, because AI also helps to make decisions, and it can make decisions better than a human being because it can absorb more data, right? So I think as financial services will be influenced by AI, it will also increasingly use Bitcoin and the Lightning Network.
Love that. I think that's a good ender to this conversation. I always ask people, what is a core belief that you will never let go as my last question. People want to know yours. They can go back to episode 8. But yeah, thanks, man. Thanks again for this wonderful conversation. I think this was broad and deep. And I want to thank you for your time, man. And let's definitely do it again, and then a bit faster.
I'd be happy to. I'm also I'm working on this book. It's taking time, but I have to do it next to my regular business, and I only have a few hours a day I can allocate towards that. So I'll be very happy to discuss that with you once it's out as well.
That's going to be called Bitcoin is Digital Real Estate, right?
Digital Real Estate is the working title for now.
Awesome. Well, if you want to follow Leon, I have all his links in the show notes in the description below, so you can follow his journey too. And thanks again, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.